In the vast expanse of the Galactic Coalition, where species from 1,000 worlds gather under uneasy truces and careful diplomacy, there exists a simple truth that every being learns from birth: never underestimate the quiet ones. For it is often the most unassuming among us who carry the deepest secrets, the most dangerous capabilities, and the power to reshape the very foundations of what we believe possible. Princess Zaratiel of the Veilfran Empire had lived her entire life surrounded by the galaxy's most formidable warriors, cunning politicians, and brilliant strategists. She could read the subtle threat displays of a Krex battle lord, navigate the complex honor codes of the Thanary warclans, and had personally witnessed the legendary ferocity of the apex hunters in their natural habitat. She thought she understood power in all its forms. She was wrong. Sometimes the most terrifying predator is the one that doesn't look like a predator at all. Sometimes the greatest weapon is wielded by hands that seem too gentle to harm a flower. And, sometimes, the fate of entire civilizations rests in the care of someone everyone else mistakes for just another rookie trying to make it in a universe far too big and dangerous for their kind. This is the story of how Princess Zaratiel learned that lesson the hard way, and how the galaxy would never be the same again. What follows is a tale that will challenge everything you think you know about strength, survival, and what it truly means to be human in a universe that has forgotten how humanity earned its place among the stars. Princess Zaratiel's crystalline eyes swept across the docking bay of Station Harmony with practiced indifference, cataloging threats and potential allies among the bustling crowd of alien dignitaries, traders, and security personnel. Her forearms moved with fluid grace as she adjusted the ceremonial weapons at her sides, each movement calculated to project both elegance and lethal capability. The Veilfran Empire had not survived 3 millennia by producing weak royalty. The Coalition's newest diplomatic station represented everything the galaxy aspired to be: a neutral meeting ground where the most powerful species could gather without the ancient grudges and territorial disputes that had plagued interstellar relations for countless generations. Representatives from the Krex Dominion stood in their imposing exoskeletons, their chittering communications barely audible over the hum of environmental systems. The ethereal Silithai floated near the viewport walls, their translucent forms shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that served as both beauty and warning. Even the notoriously reclusive Nethari had sent delegates, their tentacled forms hidden within environmental suits that leaked traces of their homeworld's toxic atmosphere. Zaratiel had attended dozens of such gatherings, each one a delicate dance of power, protocol, and barely restrained hostility. She knew how to read the subtle threat displays, when to offer respect and when to demand it, and, most importantly, how to identify the dangerous individuals in any crowd. Her survival had always depended on that skill. Which is why the human confused her so thoroughly. Marcus Chen stood near the registration desk with a datapad in hand, looking for all the universe like he had accidentally wandered into the wrong section of the station. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, and his Coalition security uniform was regulation perfect but somehow looked borrowed on his lean frame. When one of the Krex delegates accidentally knocked into him with their massive bulk, he simply smiled, apologized in broken Krex speak, and moved aside without the slightest show of offense or territorial display. "Who is that?" she asked Commander Thekvar, her chief security advisor, nodding toward the human. The veteran Thanary warrior followed her gaze, his 4 yellow eyes focusing on Marcus with predatory intensity. "Security Officer Chen, Your Highness. Recent graduate from the Coalition Academy. First deep space assignment." He paused, mandibles clicking with what Zaratiel recognized as mild disdain. "Humans are not known for their combat prowess. This one appears particularly unimpressive." Zaratiel had encountered humans before, though always in limited circumstances. They were one of the newer species to join the Coalition, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last few centuries. Most galactic citizens viewed them as useful for their adaptability and strange talent for finding compromise solutions to seemingly impossible diplomatic problems, but they were rarely considered a military threat. Their homeworld was pleasant enough, but it lacked the extreme conditions that forged truly dangerous apex predators like her own people or the nightmare worlds that birthed the Krex swarms. She watched Marcus attempt to help a struggling Nethari delegate with their environmental suit's malfunctioning translator. His movements were careful, respectful, and completely non-threatening. When the device finally activated properly, the Nethari's mechanical voice expressed gratitude in 3 different languages, and Marcus responded with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Harmless, she murmured to herself, already dismissing him from her attention. The opening ceremony proceeded with the expected pomp and careful choreography. Each delegation presented their credentials and formal statements of peaceful intent, though everyone present understood these were merely ritual words. The real negotiations would happen in private chambers, away from public scrutiny, where threats could be made and bargains struck without the need for diplomatic niceties. Zaratiel delivered her empire's statement with regal authority, her voice carrying easily through the vast assembly hall even without amplification. The Veilthran had evolved from pack hunters on a world where vocal dominance often meant survival, and she had inherited both the physical gifts and tactical instincts of her ancestors. Several species visibly stiffened when she spoke of her empire's commitment to maintaining stability through strength, understanding the implied warning beneath her carefully chosen words. Marcus Chen sat in the section reserved for station security personnel, taking notes on his datapad with the focused attention of someone still learning the intricate protocols of galactic diplomacy. Occasionally he would glance up at the speakers, and Zaratiel noticed that his expression never showed the subtle fear or respect that her words typically invoked in members of lesser species. Not defiance exactly, but something that might have been professional interest. The ceremony concluded without incident, and the delegates began dispersing toward their assigned quarters or the station's various social areas. Zaratiel was making her way toward the diplomatic wing when she heard the first scream. The sound came from the station's commercial sector, a multi-level marketplace where traders, tourists, and off-duty personnel could browse goods from across the galaxy. The scream was followed quickly by others, along with the unmistakable chittering roar that made every being in the vicinity freeze in primal terror. Apex hunters. The creatures were legendary throughout the galaxy, though few had ever seen one and lived to describe the encounter. They evolved on the nightmare world of Kethmore, where the gravitational stress and radiation had produced predators so perfectly adapted to killing that they had eventually consumed every other form of life on their planet. Most civilizations had encountered them only as an extinction-level threat, entire colonies vanishing without trace until orbital bombardment was the only remaining option. 3 of the creatures had somehow breached the station's security, and they moved through the marketplace like liquid death. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall on 6 legs that ended in razor-sharp talons, their obsidian carapaces seeming to absorb light itself. Multiple sets of eyes tracked different targets simultaneously while rows of serrated teeth prepared to process whatever they caught. They moved with impossible speed and coordination, treating the fleeing crowds like a hunting game. Station security arrived within minutes, but their weapons merely scratched the creature's natural armor. The Krex delegates attempted to establish a defensive perimeter, but even their formidable combat capabilities seemed inadequate against predators that had evolved to hunt things far more dangerous than civilized beings with modern weapons. Zaratiel drew her own weapons, feeling the familiar weight of the plasma blades her people had perfected over millennia of warfare. She was preparing to join the battle when she noticed something that stopped her cold. Marcus Chen was walking directly toward the creatures. Not running, not taking cover, not even drawing the standard-issue sidearm that all security personnel carried. He moved with calm, measured steps, his hands visible and empty, his posture relaxed in a way that should have been suicidal in the presence of apex predators. What is he doing? Commander Thekvar hissed, his own weapons drawn and ready. Zaratiel couldn't answer because she genuinely didn't know. The human's behavior made no tactical sense. He was approaching 3 of the most dangerous predators in known space as if he were about to ask them for directions. The first apex hunter noticed him when he was still 20 meters away. Its multiple eyes focused on him with laser intensity, and it began the low, subsonic growl that typically preceded an attack that would reduce a target to component molecules in seconds. Marcus stopped walking and stood perfectly still. The creature took a step toward him, then another, its killing instincts fully engaged. The other 2 hunters noticed the interaction and began converging on what should have been easy prey. That was when something extraordinary happened. Marcus looked directly at the lead creature, made eye contact with something that had literally never allowed another being to survive such an encounter, and did something that would be discussed in xenobiology texts for generations to come. He smiled. Not the fearful, desperate expression of someone trying to placate a predator. Not the aggressive display that other apex species might use to establish dominance. This was something else entirely, calm, confident, and somehow conveying information that bypassed every survival instinct the creatures possessed. The lead apex hunter stopped moving. For several heartbeats, the marketplace existed in a bubble of impossible silence. 3 perfect killing machines stood motionless while a single human maintained eye contact with the kind of predator that had driven entire star systems to extinction. Then, with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed, all 3 creatures slowly backed away. They didn't flee. They didn't attack. They simply acknowledged some invisible boundary that Marcus had somehow established and retreated with the same deadly grace they had shown while hunting. Within minutes, they had vanished into the station's maintenance systems, leaving behind only the memory of an encounter that should have been impossible. Marcus stood alone in the center of the marketplace, surrounded by debris and abandoned merchandise, looking mildly concerned about the property damage. When the security teams finally reached him, he was already pulling out his datapad to file an incident report. "How?" Commander Thekvar whispered, his professional composure finally cracking. "How did he do that?" Zaratiel didn't answer immediately. She was too busy recalibrating everything she thought she knew about humans, about predators, and about the quiet security officer who had just accomplished something that violated every principle of xenoecology she had ever learned. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "I think," she said slowly, "we may have underestimated him." Marcus finished his preliminary report and looked up to find dozens of beings staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to terror to confusion. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the attention, as if facing down 3 apex hunters was simply part of his normal duties. "Is everyone all right?" he asked in his soft, unassuming voice. "We should probably get medical teams down here for anyone who was injured during the evacuation." And that was when Princess Zaratiel realized that her supposedly quiet, boring diplomatic mission had just become the most interesting few days of her very long life. Because whatever Marcus Chen was, he definitely wasn't just a rookie security officer. And she was determined to find out exactly what he was hiding. The diplomatic dinner that evening proceeded with the kind of careful normalcy that only highlighted how abnormal the day's events had been. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in Station Harmony's grand dining hall, each delegation maintaining their traditional customs while navigating the complex social requirements of interspecies diplomacy. The Veilthran contingent occupied a position of honor near the head table, their crystalline features catching and reflecting the carefully modulated lighting in patterns that conveyed both beauty and subtle warnings about their predatory heritage. Zaratiel picked at her meal with one set of hands while her other pair remained positioned near her ceremonial weapons. Old habits died hard, and today's encounter with the apex hunters had reminded everyone present that the galaxy remained a dangerous place despite all their technological advances and diplomatic protocols. Marcus Chen sat at the security personnel table near the back of the hall, looking entirely unremarkable as he worked his way through what appeared to be a simple protein synthesis meal. He engaged in quiet conversation with his fellow officers, occasionally laughing at some shared joke, giving no indication that he had done anything more remarkable than file routine paperwork. The disconnect was maddening. "Your Highness seems distracted," observed Ambassador Veltar, the Silithai delegate whose shimmering form cast dancing shadows across the table. Like all of his species, he possessed an uncanny ability to read emotional states through bioluminescent pattern recognition, making him exceptionally skilled at detecting hidden tensions during negotiations. "The day's excitement has given me much to consider," Zaratiel replied diplomatically, though her gaze kept drifting toward the human security officer. "It's not often one witnesses such an unusual resolution to a crisis situation." The Krex delegate, War Speaker Thex Null, clicked his mandibles in what passed for agreement among his people. The human's behavior was unprecedented. "My tactical databases contain no reference patterns for such an interaction with apex hunters. Either he possessed some unknown technology, or..." He paused, unwilling to voice the alternative. "Or he accomplished something that our combined knowledge base insists should be impossible," finished Commander Rathek of the Nethari expedition. His mechanical translator gave his words an emotionless quality that somehow made them more unsettling. "My species has catalogued every known method of apex predator deterrence across 14 different biomes. None apply to this situation." Zaratiel excused herself from the table before the conversation could delve deeper into speculation that might be overheard by less friendly ears. She had learned long ago that information was often more valuable than weapons, and the mystery of Marcus represented the kind of intelligence gap that could shift the balance of power between entire civilizations. Her investigation began with the most obvious approach, accessing his official records through proper diplomatic channels. Commander Thekvar had already compiled a basic file through standard security protocols, but, even with her royal access codes, the information seemed frustratingly sparse. Marcus Chen. Born on Earth Colony 7, a modest agricultural world known primarily for its grain exports and peaceful reputation. Standard Coalition education, graduating with unremarkable but solid academic scores. Military service record showed completion of basic training and security specialization, with notation for exceptional performance in crisis management exercises, but no specifics about what that meant. His psychological evaluations were equally generic, stable, reliable, well-suited for diplomatic security assignments. Nothing in his background suggested he possessed any extraordinary capabilities. No advanced combat training, no exposure to exotic technologies, no genetic modifications or cybernetic enhancements. He appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a competent but unremarkable human who had somehow ended up in the right place at the right time. Except that explanation didn't account for what she had witnessed. Zaratiel spent the next hour accessing every database her security clearance allowed, searching for any reference to human capabilities that might explain the afternoon's events. What she found was equally puzzling in its ordinariness. Humans were documented as having evolved on a world with moderate gravity and a relatively stable environment. Their technology was adequate but not revolutionary. Their military forces had performed competently in several minor conflicts but had never faced anything approaching the threat level of apex hunters. Their society valued cooperation and adaptability, traits that served them well in diplomatic roles but hardly qualified as apex predator deterrents. Yet there were small details in the historical records that nagged at her analytical mind. Humans had survived first contact with 17 different hostile species without suffering the catastrophic losses that typically accompanied such encounters. They had established successful colonies on worlds that other species had deemed too dangerous for habitation. Their explorers had a documented tendency to return from expeditions that should have been fatal with reports of interesting wildlife encounters that other species would have classified as extinction events. The pattern was subtle, buried in centuries of routine reports and bureaucratic documentation. But, once Zaratiel began looking for it, the evidence was undeniable. Humans had an unusually high survival rate in situations that killed most other sentient beings. Her contemplation was interrupted by a soft chime from her personal communicator. Commander Thekvar's image appeared on the holodisplay, his expression troubled. "Your Highness, we have a situation. 3 more apex hunters have been detected in the station's lower maintenance levels. Security teams are requesting evacuation protocols." Zaratiel's blood chilled. Apex hunters were notoriously solitary creatures, rarely traveling in groups larger than mated pairs. 6 of them in one location suggested either a breeding swarm, which would be catastrophic beyond imagination, or some kind of coordinated hunt that targeted something specific. "Where is Officer Chen?" she asked immediately. "En route to the affected area with the primary response team." "Your Highness, perhaps it would be advisable to, I'm going with them." "Your Highness, I cannot recommend, I'm not asking for recommendations, Commander." 20 minutes later, Zaratiel found herself in the utilitarian corridors of Station Harmony's maintenance sector, wearing tactical armor that had been hastily modified to accommodate her Veilfran physiology. The security team moved with professional competence, their scanning equipment detecting the creature's movement through the station's infrastructure while maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance. Marcus Chen moved with the same casual confidence he had shown that afternoon, though Zaratiel noticed subtle differences in his behavior now that she was watching more carefully. His steps fell silently despite the metal grating beneath their feet. His head turned in small, precise movements that seemed to track sounds too faint for anyone else to detect. When he paused to examine scratches left by the creature's claws, his fingers traced the patterns with the kind of familiarity that suggested extensive experience rather than academic knowledge. 3 of them, he said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the narrow corridor. "Moving as a pack, which is unusual behavior for their species. They're following scent trails rather than hunting randomly, so they're tracking something specific." "How can you possibly know that?" demanded Lieutenant Corksell, the Thannery officer leading the security team. Marcus looked up from the claw marks with an expression of mild surprise, as if the question confused him. The spacing between their tracks shows coordinated movement rather than competitive hunting. The scratch patterns indicate scent marking behavior, and the depth suggests they're not feeding stressed. He paused, seeming to realize that his explanation wasn't clarifying anything. It's fairly obvious if you know what to look for. Lieutenant Corksell exchanged glances with the other security personnel, none of whom seemed to find the creature behavior quite as obvious as Marcus suggested. They found the first apex hunter in a junction chamber where several maintenance tunnels converged. The creature crouched motionless in the center of the space, its multiple eyes fixed on something that wasn't immediately visible to the security team. Its posture suggested focused attention rather than aggressive hunting, which was almost more unsettling than open hostility. "It's waiting," Marcus observed, studying the creature's stance with professional interest. "Waiting for what?" Zaratiel asked. "For its packmates to get into position. They're setting up an ambush pattern around whatever they're tracking." He checked his chronometer with the casual air of someone timing a routine maintenance procedure. "Should be ready in about 90 seconds. The precision of his prediction was almost as disturbing as the situation itself. Zaratiel was beginning to suspect that Marcus Chen's knowledge of apex predator behavior was far more extensive than any human should reasonably be. Her suspicions were confirmed when the other two hunters appeared exactly 93 seconds later, moving into positions that created a perfect killing triangle around a service hatch that led to the station's primary data core. Whatever they were hunting had taken refuge in one of the most critical areas of the station, where a firefight would risk catastrophic systems damage. "We need to get them away from there," Lieutenant Corksell said grimly. "If they breach the data core housing, we could lose life support for half the station." "I'll handle it," Marcus said simply. Before anyone could protest, he stepped out of cover and walked directly into the center of the killing zone. The three apex hunters immediately focused on him with laser intensity, their perfect coordination dissolving as they struggled to process what their instincts were telling them. Here was prey that moved like prey, looked like prey, and smelled like prey, but somehow projected the kind of apex dominance that their species only recognized in creatures capable of hunting them. Marcus stood perfectly still in the center of their formation, making eye contact with each creature in turn. When he spoke, his voice was so soft that Zaratiel had to strain to hear him, but somehow it carried clearly to every hunter in the chamber. "You're hunting in the wrong territory," he said calmly. "What you're tracking isn't here anymore. But there's plenty of suitable prey in the outer docking bays if you're genuinely hungry." The lead hunter tilted its head with an almost avian gesture, as if considering his words. After a long moment, it made a low sound that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a purr, but somehow conveyed acknowledgement. All three creatures turned and melted away into the shadows, leaving the security team standing in stunned silence. "How?" Lieutenant Corksell whispered, echoing the question that seemed to follow Marcus wherever he went. Marcus checked the service hatch they had been stalking, running his fingers around the seal with practiced efficiency. "They weren't hunting randomly," he said, apparently oblivious to the shocked stares directed at him. "Something else was down here, something they considered a threat worth pack hunting. Whatever it was, it used this access point to reach the data core." He opened the hatch and peered into the cramped space beyond, his expression sharpening with sudden concern. "We need to evacuate the diplomatic quarters immediately," he said, his casual demeanor vanishing for the first time since Zaratiel had met him. "And we need to do it right now." "What did you find?" Zaratiel demanded. Marcus looked up at her, and, for just a moment, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes that made her understand why apex hunters backed away from him. It wasn't cruelty or aggression, but it was definitely the gaze of something that had never been prey. "Evidence that someone has been accessing classified coalition databases," he said quietly. "Someone who knows how to move through this station without triggering any security systems, and who's been gathering intelligence on every diplomatic delegation present." He straightened, and his mild-mannered expression returned as if it had never left. "Which suggests that today's apex hunter incidents might not have been accidents." Zaratiel felt her blood turn to ice as the implications hit her. Someone had deliberately introduced 6 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators into a diplomatic station, possibly as cover for intelligence gathering or sabotage operations. The attack could have been targeting any of the delegations, or all of them. Who would be capable of such an operation, she asked. Marcus smiled that same calm, confident smile he had shown the Apex Hunters, and Zaratiel suddenly realized that she might have been asking the wrong questions about him all along. Maybe the real question wasn't how a rookie security officer could handle Apex predators. Maybe the real question was what kind of being ended up working as a rookie security officer when they clearly possessed capabilities that could reshape galactic politics. And whether Marcus Chen was protecting the diplomatic mission, or whether the diplomatic mission was simply his cover for something else entirely. The emergency session convened at 0300 station time, when most of the diplomatic delegations would normally be in their rest cycles. Princess Zaratiel had insisted on the unconventional timing after Marcus's discovery in the data core access tunnels, reasoning that whoever had orchestrated the Apex Hunter incidents would be less likely to monitor their activities during off hours. The secure conference room buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from each major delegation gathered around the circular table. The Krex delegates chittered among themselves in their rapid-fire combat language, while the sci-fi floated near the walls in formations that suggested heightened defensive postures. Even the normally unflappable Nethari seemed agitated, their mechanical translators producing sharp, staccato bursts of processed speech. Marcus stood at the room's main display panel, his civilian security uniform somehow looking more official in the harsh emergency lighting. He had spent the past 6 hours working with the station's technical staff to trace the data intrusions, and his findings were more disturbing than anyone had initially suspected. The access began 47 hours ago, he reported, his voice carrying easily through the chamber despite its soft tone. Someone with extremely sophisticated technical capabilities has been systematically downloading classified files from each delegation's secure databases. Not just surface intelligence, deep tactical assessments, economic projections, military capabilities, even personal psychological profiles of key diplomatic personnel. Ambassador Veltar's bioluminescent pattern shifted to colors that Zaratiel recognized as extreme alarm. Such information would be invaluable to hostile factions seeking to destabilize coalition relations, the sci-fi said. But the technical requirements for such an operation would be enormous. Very few beings possess the capabilities to breach our security systems. Which is why the Apex Hunters were such an elegant distraction, Marcus continued, highlighting data streams on the main display. While everyone was focused on immediate survival, the real operation continued undisturbed. The creatures were never meant to cause casualties, they were meant to create chaos and draw attention away from the data theft. War Speaker Thexnal leaned forward, his massive bulk making the reinforced chair creak ominously. You speak as if you understand the tactical thinking behind such an operation, human. How does a mere security officer possess such insights into advanced espionage techniques? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Zaratiel noticed that Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, his mild-mannered facade seemed to thin, revealing something more calculating underneath. I've had experience with similar situations, he said carefully. Sometimes security work involves more than just checking identification badges. What kind of experience? Zaratiel pressed, her own tactical instincts finally overriding diplomatic protocols. Your official records show standard coalition training, nothing that would qualify you for counterintelligence analysis. Marcus was quiet for several seconds, and, in that silence, Zaratiel began to understand that she had been asking the wrong questions since the moment they met. The real mystery wasn't how he had handled the Apex Hunters, it was why someone with his obvious capabilities was working a routine security assignment in the first place. Sometimes, he said finally, the most effective cover is complete honesty. The statement made no immediate sense, but, before anyone could press for clarification, the conference room's emergency alert system activated. Red lights bathed the chamber as Commander Thekvar's voice crackled through the communication system. Your Highness, we have multiple breaches in the diplomatic quarters. Security teams are responding, but... His voice trailed off in a way that suggested whatever he was seeing defied easy description. How many Apex Hunters? Marcus asked immediately. That's the problem, Officer Chin. They're not Apex Hunters. The security cameras showed creatures that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of biology. They moved through the station's corridors like liquid shadow, their forms shifting and flowing in ways that suggested they weren't entirely bound by conventional physical constraints. When they encountered obstacles, they simply flowed around them, their bodies reorganizing at the molecular level to pass through spaces that should have been impossibly small. Shadowkin breathed Ambassador Veltar, his luminescent patterns now pulsing in patterns that Zaratiel had never seen before. But that's impossible. They were extinct. We made certain they were extinct. The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop by several degrees as the implications of that statement settled over the assembled delegates. The Shadowkin had been one of the galaxy's most feared predatory species before their homeworld was destroyed in what official records described as a regrettable but necessary preventive action nearly 2 centuries ago. They possessed the ability to phase through most forms of matter, making them virtually impossible to contain or destroy through conventional means. More importantly, they hunted based on psychic resonance rather than physical senses, targeting beings with strong emotional signatures or unusual mental capabilities. In a station filled with powerful political figures and brilliant diplomatic minds, they would have an abundance of attractive prey. "The question," said Commander Rathek of the Nethari expedition, his mechanical voice somehow conveying dread despite its emotionless tone, "is how they came to be here, and why someone capable of controlling extinct predatory species would waste time with data theft when they could simply eliminate all of us." Marcus was studying the security feeds with an expression of intense concentration, his fingers dancing across the control interface with a fluidity that suggested far more familiarity with advanced systems than his background should have allowed. "They're not hunting randomly," he observed, highlighting movement patterns on the display. "They're driving us toward specific locations. This is a herding operation." "Herding us toward what?" Zaratiel demanded. Marcus's hands stilled on the controls, and, when he looked up at the assembled delegates, his expression carried a weight of knowledge that seemed far too heavy for someone his apparent age. "Toward whoever orchestrated this entire operation. Someone who wants to meet with us under circumstances where we can't call for help, can't escape, and can't refuse to cooperate." He paused, considering the tactical implications. "Someone who has access to resources that officially don't exist and capabilities that shouldn't be possible." The lights flickered as something large moved through the station's infrastructure, and the environmental systems began cycling with the harsh efficiency of emergency protocols. Through the conference room's reinforced windows, Zaratiel could see the distant glow of energy weapons as security teams engaged threats throughout the diplomatic levels. "We need to evacuate to the emergency shelters," War Speaker Thexnal stated with military authority. "Standard protocols for catastrophic security breaches." "The emergency shelters are exactly where they want us to go," Marcus said quietly. "Isolated, confined spaces with limited exit points and no communication with the outside galaxy. Perfect for conducting negotiations that require absolute privacy." "Then, what do you suggest?" Zaratiel asked. Marcus was silent for a long moment, and she could see him weighing options with the kind of strategic thinking that came from experience far beyond his apparent years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone of resigned determination. "I suggest we stop pretending this is a random attack and start treating it as what it actually is, a very sophisticated invitation to a meeting we can't refuse." He moved to the conference room's central console and began entering commands that caused several delegates to shift nervously. Whatever he was accessing required authorization codes that should have been far above his security clearance level. "Officer Chen," Lieutenant Korksal said warningly, "you're exceeding your authorized access parameters." "I know," Marcus replied without looking up from the console. "But, under current circumstances, I think we can dispense with normal protocols." The main display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the entire station, with real-time tracking of both the security teams and the Shadowkin entities. The pattern was becoming clear: every engagement, every seeming victory or defeat, was gradually pushing both defenders and attackers toward a single location in the station's central hub. "The primary conference chamber," Zaratiel said, recognizing the destination. "The most secure location on the station, designed to host negotiations between hostile species without risk of external interference. Also the one place where someone could meet with representatives from every major galactic power while ensuring complete privacy," Marcus added. "No recording devices, no external communications, no witnesses except the people in the room." A new alarm joined the cacophony as the station's defensive systems detected what the computers classified as catastrophic structural anomalies in multiple sections. The Shadowkin weren't just hunting, they were systematically dismantling the station's ability to resist whatever was coming next. "We have a choice," Marcus said, his calm voice cutting through the chaos of emergency alerts and frightened conversations. "We can try to fight our way through creatures that can phase through matter and weapons that shouldn't exist, or we can accept the invitation and find out what someone powerful enough to command extinct species actually wants from us." "You're suggesting we surrender," Commander Thekvar said with disgust. "I'm suggesting we gather intelligence," Marcus corrected. "Because whoever is behind this operation has capabilities that threaten the balance of power in the entire galaxy. We need to understand what we're facing before we can determine how to respond." Zaratiel studied his expression, noting the subtle confidence that suggested he wasn't as helpless as he appeared. "You have a plan." It wasn't a question, and Marcus didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I have contingencies," he said carefully. "But they require getting close enough to the source of this operation to understand what we're really dealing with." The conference room shuddered as something massive impacted the outer hull, and the lights flickered again before switching to emergency power. Through the static-filled communication system, they could hear confused reports from security teams throughout the station as their sophisticated weapons proved ineffective against enemies that could simply step out of phase when threatened. "Motion to accept Officer Chen's recommendation," Zaratiel said formally, invoking diplomatic protocols even as their world collapsed around them. "Seconded," said Ambassador Veltar, his luminescent patterns now showing the complex sequences that indicated careful strategic thinking rather than panic. One by one, the other delegates added their agreement, understanding that conventional responses to threats weren't going to work against enemies who possessed technology that violated the known laws of physics. Marcus nodded and began powering down the conference room's defensive systems, effectively opening the doors to whatever wanted to meet with them. "One thing you should all understand," he said as the security locks disengaged, "is that from this point forward, everything you think you know about galactic politics is probably going to change." The lights went out completely, plunging them into the kind of absolute darkness that only existed in the depths of space. In that darkness, Zaratiel heard the soft sound of something that might have been footsteps, or might have been something else entirely. When the lights returned, they were no longer alone in the conference room. And Princess Zaratiel finally understood why Marcus Chen had seemed so familiar with advanced predator behavior, because he had never been the prey in any of these encounters. He had been the apex predator all along. The figure that materialized in the restored lighting defied easy classification. At first glance, it appeared to be another human, tall, elegant, with the kind of ageless features that suggested either advanced genetic modification or something more exotic than conventional biology. The being wore clothing that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and its eyes held depths that suggested intelligence far older than any single lifetime should contain. But it was the way Marcus Chen reacted to the newcomer that truly captured Princess Zaratiel's attention. His entire posture changed, becoming more alert, more focused, and somehow more dangerous than anything she had witnessed during the Apex Hunter encounters. For the first time since she had met him, Marcus looked like what she now suspected he had always been, a predator recognizing another apex predator. "Hello, Marcus," the figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in the listeners' minds rather than their ears. "It's been a long time." "Not nearly long enough, Kane," Marcus replied, his mild-mannered facade dissolving completely. "I thought we had an agreement about staying out of Coalition space." "Agreements change, as do circumstances." The being called Kane glided closer to the conference table, moving with the kind of fluid grace that suggested gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. "Besides, your current assignment provided such an excellent opportunity for a family reunion." The word family sent chills through every delegate present, because the implications were staggering. If Marcus Chen was somehow related to this entity that could command extinct predatory species and phase in and out of reality at will, then everything they thought they understood about human capabilities was fundamentally wrong. "You orchestrated all of this just to get my attention?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that none of the delegates had heard before. 6 Apex Hunters and 3 Shadowkin, not to mention risking the lives of every being on this station? "The Hunters were necessary to confirm your current capabilities," Kane replied smoothly. "Your domestication has been more thorough than we anticipated." We needed to verify that you could still access your true nature when circumstances required it. Zaratiel's mind raced as she tried to process the conversation. Marcus's domestication suggested that his current mild-mannered personality wasn't his natural state, but rather some kind of deliberate suppression of more dangerous abilities. The idea that humans might possess hidden capabilities that they actively conceal from the galactic community was terrifying on multiple levels. The Shadowkin were simply insurance, Kane continued, apparently oblivious to the fear radiating from the assembled delegates. In case your conditioning had become too complete and you required motivation to remember what you truly are. I remember perfectly, Marcus said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made every predatory species in the room take a step backward. The question is whether you remember why I chose to leave that life behind. Kane's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. Because you developed a conscience? Because you decided that our methods were too harsh for your newly acquired sensibilities? Or because you thought you could hide among these lesser species and pretend to be something you're not? The insult to the galactic community was delivered so casually that it took several seconds for its implications to register. This being, whatever it was, considered every advanced species represented in the room to be inherently inferior to whatever Marcus actually was. I left because the mission parameters changed, Marcus replied, his voice remaining carefully level. The original objectives were completed centuries ago. Continuing the program served no constructive purpose. Centuries? War Speaker Thexnal interrupted, his combat instincts overriding diplomatic protocols. Human, you speak as if you have lived for centuries, but your species barely achieved interstellar flight within the last few hundred years. Marcus turned to look at the Krex delegate, and, for a moment his expression showed something that might have been pity. That's what we wanted you to believe. The statement hung in the air like a gravitational anomaly, bending everything around it into new and frightening configurations. If humans had been spacefaring for longer than their official histories suggested, if they possessed technologies and capabilities that they had deliberately concealed from the galactic community, then the entire foundation of coalition politics was built on false assumptions. You're talking about the Quiet War, Ambassador Veltar said suddenly, his luminescent pattern shifting to colors that indicated deep memory access. The period in galactic history when several aggressive species simply disappeared without explanation. No wreckage, no survivors, just empty star systems where thriving civilizations had existed. Kane smiled, and the expression was far more unsettling than any threat could have been. Very good, Ambassador. Though I believe your historians classified it as a natural evolutionary bottleneck rather than acknowledging it as deliberate intervention. You're saying humans were responsible for the extinction of entire species? Zaratiel demanded, her voice carrying all the authority of royal bloodlines that had never been seriously threatened. Not extinction, Marcus said quietly. Relocation. Most of the supposedly extinct species were moved to suitable worlds outside the galactic core, where they could continue their development without threatening emerging civilizations. A few of the more aggressively expansionist cultures were discouraged from continuing their military expansion programs. And the ones that refused to relocate peacefully? Commander Rathak asked, his mechanical voice somehow conveying dread despite its emotionless tone. Marcus and Kane exchanged glances that carried the weight of shared history and mutual understanding that spanned centuries. They learned why Earth became known as the Death World among the few species that discovered it, Kane said simply. Not because of its environmental hazards, but because of what evolved there. The conference room fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled delegates. Earth wasn't just another pleasant garden world that had produced an adaptable species suitable for diplomatic roles. It was the homeworld of apex predators so sophisticated that they had single-handedly reshaped galactic civilization while maintaining the illusion that they were newcomers to interstellar society. The Great Peace, Zaratiel said slowly, pieces falling into place in her mind. The period when galactic warfare simply stopped happening, when aggressive species began focusing on internal development rather than expansion, when the coalition was able to form without the territorial disputes that had prevented previous unification attempts. That wasn't natural evolution, that was enforcement. Enforcement with a very light touch, Marcus clarified. We never wanted to rule the galaxy or replace existing governments. We simply wanted to create conditions where different species could coexist without the constant threat of extinction-level conflicts. And, now? War Speaker Thexnal asked, his tactical mind already calculating the military implications of humans who possessed centuries of hidden technological development. Now, Kane said, his attention returning to Marcus, circumstances have changed again. The peace you helped create is fracturing. Several species have begun developing weapons technologies that could threaten entire star systems. Others are forming military alliances that suggest a return to the old patterns of aggressive expansion. So you ought to restart the program, Marcus said, and there was resignation in his voice that suggested he had expected this conversation for a long time. We want you to return home, Kane corrected. Your exile has served its purpose. You've learned to understand these species from the inside, to appreciate their individual cultures and capabilities. That knowledge makes you uniquely qualified to help us implement more sophisticated intervention strategies. And if I refuse? Kane's expression grew serious for the first time since his arrival. Then, we proceed without your input, using methods that may be less precise than what you would recommend. The threat was delivered so quietly that it might have been mistaken for casual conversation, but every delegate present understood its implications. Whatever organization Marcus and Kane represented possessed the power to reshape galactic civilization through force if diplomatic solutions failed. There's a third option, Marcus said after a long moment of consideration. Which is full disclosure. No more hidden capabilities, no more covert intervention programs, no more pretending to be something we're not. Marcus looked around the conference table, making eye contact with each delegate in turn. We tell the galactic community the truth about human history and capabilities, then work openly with existing governments to address current threats. Kane's expression showed genuine surprise. You would risk everything we've built on the assumption that these species will accept partnership with beings they'll inevitably view as a threat to their independence? I think the real threat to their independence comes from continuing to manipulate galactic politics from the shadows, Marcus replied. Eventually, someone was going to discover the truth. Better to reveal it on our terms and work toward genuine cooperation than to maintain the deception until it inevitably collapses. Zaratiel realized that she was witnessing a debate that would determine the future of every civilization in the galaxy. The humans possessed capabilities that could enforce peace through strength, but they were choosing between covert control and open partnership with species they could easily dominate. The delegates present represent most of the major galactic powers, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the assembled ambassadors. If they're willing to work with us knowing what we actually are, then disclosure becomes possible. If not, he shrugged. Then, we continue managing galactic affairs from behind the scenes, and hope that eventually conditions improve enough to make openness viable. All eyes turned to the diplomatic representatives, and Zaratiel realized that her response in the next few moments would influence the course of galactic history for generations to come. The choice was between partnership with apex predators who had been secretly protecting the galaxy for centuries, or continuing to live under their hidden oversight while pretending to govern their own affairs. Either way, the age of innocence was over. But, perhaps, she thought as she prepared to speak, the age of genuine cooperation was about to begin. Princess Zaratiel stood slowly, her forearms moving with the fluid grace that had been bred into Veilthran royalty over millennia of evolutionary refinement. Every being in the conference room watched her with the intensity reserved for moments when history balanced on the edge of a knife. Her words would determine whether the galaxy entered a new age of cooperation or continued existing under the hidden governance of beings who had shaped their civilization from the shadows. Before I speak for the Veilthran Empire, she said, her voice carrying the authority of countless generations of warrior queens, I need to understand the scope of what we're discussing. Marcus, how many humans possess your capabilities? Marcus exchanged another glance with Kane before answering. Active operatives? Fewer than 1,000 across the entire galaxy. But, the total human population with enhanced capabilities numbers in the millions. Most live normal lives on colony worlds, their abilities suppressed or dormant unless activated by specific circumstances. Enhanced how? War Speaker Thexnal demanded, his military mind immediately focusing on threat assessment parameters. Improved reflexes, enhanced pattern recognition, stronger resistance to environmental stress, extended lifespans, and, in some cases, limited psychic abilities, Kane replied with clinical precision. Nothing that violates the fundamental laws of physics, but significant enough to provide advantages in survival situations. The abilities we witnessed today with the predatory species? Ambassador Veltar asked, his luminescent pattern shifting to configurations that indicated complex analytical processing. Apex predator recognition is more complex, Marcus said. It involves understanding behavioral patterns, pheromone signatures, and psychic resonances that most species can't detect. We didn't evolve those capabilities naturally, they were developed through necessity during the first expansion period, when humans encountered species that could have easily wiped us out if we hadn't learned to communicate with them on instinctual levels. Zaratiel absorbed this information while calculating political implications that stretched across star systems. You're telling us that humanity has been conducting a centuries-long genetic and technological enhancement program while maintaining the appearance of being a minor species suitable primarily for diplomatic roles. That's correct, Marcus confirmed. The appearance of weakness was always our greatest strength. No one suspects the mild-mannered clerk of being a strategic threat, which made it possible for us to position ourselves in locations where we could monitor and influence developing situations. And the coalition itself? Commander Rathak asked, his mechanical voice somehow conveying the weight of suspicion. How much of our supposedly independent organization is actually under human oversight? Kane smiled that unsettling smile again. Less than you fear, more than you'd prefer. We've never sought direct control over coalition policies, but we have intervened when decisions threaten to destabilize entire regions or lead to extinction-level conflicts. The Therian War Speaker Thexnall said suddenly, recognition dawning in his compound eyes. It ended when their battle fleets simply vanished during what should have been their final assault on the Nexus worlds. Official reports claimed mechanical failures, but the probability calculations never made sense. Mechanical failures can be surprisingly consistent when they're deliberately induced, Marcus said mildly. The Therian Empire was 12 hours away from deploying planet-killer weapons against civilian populations. We convinced them that pursuing a diplomatic solution would be more beneficial to their long-term interests. Convinced them how? Zaratiel pressed. By demonstrating that their most advanced military technology could be disabled without their forces even detecting the source of the interference, Kane replied. Sometimes the most effective threat is the one that proves the target's helplessness rather than promising their destruction. The implications were staggering. Every major conflict resolution in the past 3 centuries might have involved covert human intervention, meaning that the galactic community's proud history of diplomatic achievements was built on a foundation of hidden manipulation by a species that could have simply conquered them all at any time. You must understand our perspective, Ambassador Veltar said, his patterns now showing the complex rhythms that indicated deep philosophical consideration. Learning that our civilization has been under the protection of a species we considered junior partners fundamentally alters our understanding of our own achievements and independence. That's exactly why we maintained the deception for so long, Marcus said. You did achieve those diplomatic breakthroughs, you did develop those technologies, you did create the cultural advances that made the coalition possible. We simply removed some of the external threats that might have prevented your success. But, now those external threats are returning, Kane added, his expression growing serious. 3 different species have begun developing antimatter weapons without proper containment protocols. 2 others are pursuing biological warfare research that could affect entire ecosystems. The hegemony of Cathalar has started recruiting mercenary fleets with the apparent intention of resuming their expansion program. And, most concerning, Marcus continued, we've detected evidence that at least one species has begun attempting to reverse engineer the technology we used during the Quiet War. If they succeed, they could pose a threat not just to local star systems, but to the stability of this entire galactic arm. Zaratiel felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a mantle woven from the fates of billions of beings. The choice before them was no longer simply about revealing human capabilities, it was about determining whether the galaxy would face its emerging challenges through cooperation or continue stumbling toward conflicts that could reshape the fundamental nature of interstellar civilization. The Veilfran Empire, she said formally, accepts the proposal for full disclosure and open cooperation. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before their impact registered. War Speaker Thexnall clicked his mandibles in what might have been surprise or approval. The Krex Dominion concurs. Our warrior traditions value strength openly displayed over hidden manipulation. The Silithai Confederacy agrees, Ambassador Veltar added, his patterns now showing the bright configurations associated with hope and new possibilities. Truth, even difficult truth, provides a better foundation for cooperation than comfortable illusions. One by one, the other delegates added their agreement, understanding that they were voting not just for disclosure but for a fundamental restructuring of galactic politics. The age of human secrecy was ending, to be replaced by something unprecedented, an open alliance between apex predators and the species they had been secretly protecting. Very well, Kane said, though his expression suggested he had mixed feelings about the decision. Marcus, you'll coordinate the transition with coalition leadership. Full disclosure of human capabilities, historical intervention activities, and current threat assessments. The Council will need time to prepare for the political implications. How long before the information becomes public? Zaratiel asked. 6 months, Marcus replied. Long enough for each government to brief their military and intelligence services, short enough to prevent the news from leaking in uncontrolled ways. We'll also need time to relocate the humans currently working in sensitive positions where their enhanced capabilities might be seen as infiltration rather than cooperation. And the immediate threats you mentioned? War Speaker Thexnall demanded. How do we address those while maintaining the appearance of normal coalition operations? Marcus and Kane exchanged one final look, and Zaratiel could see centuries of partnership and disagreement passing between them in that glance. We handle them the way we should have been handling threats all along, Marcus said finally. Together, openly, with full knowledge of each other's capabilities and limitations. It's going to be complicated, Kane warned. Some species will see this revelation as validation of their suspicions about human intentions. Others will view it as an opportunity to demand protection services they haven't earned. A few might even attempt to challenge us directly, thinking that openness implies vulnerability. Then, we'll deal with those challenges as they arise, Marcus replied. But, we'll do it as partners rather than as secret guardians managing lesser species. The lights in the conference room brightened as the station's emergency systems detected the end of the threat condition. Somewhere in the depths of Station Harmony, the Apex Hunters and Shadowkin were presumably departing as quietly as they had arrived, their role in this cosmic reshuffling complete. There's one more thing, Marcus said as the delegates began to rise from their seats. The humans who have been working throughout the galaxy in various roles, they volunteered for this life. When we reveal the truth about our capabilities, many of them will have the option to return to human space or continue serving in their current positions with their real identities known. Will you? Zaratiel asked, surprising herself with the personal nature of the question. Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since she had met him, the expression seemed completely genuine. I think I'd like to see how this new age of cooperation develops. Besides, someone needs to help train the next generation of diplomats in how to work effectively with apex predators. As the delegates filed out of the conference room, beginning the complex process of briefing their governments and preparing for a future none of them had imagined that morning, Zaratiel found herself walking beside Marcus through the corridors of Station Harmony. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. Your personality, your apparent inexperience, the way you seem genuinely surprised by your own capabilities? Marcus considered the question carefully. The personality is real, it developed over decades of working with other species and learning to appreciate perspectives beyond human tactical thinking. The inexperience was partly genuine, partly performance. I really was new to diplomatic security work, even if I wasn't new to managing dangerous situations. And the surprise? That was completely real, he admitted. I haven't used those capabilities in over 50 years. I wasn't entirely certain they would still function when I needed them. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, passing through sections of the station where normal operations were gradually resuming as word spread that the emergency had ended. Princess, Marcus said eventually, there's something you should understand about the choice your people just made. Which is? By agreeing to open cooperation rather than hidden oversight, you've taken responsibility for your own protection in a way that most species haven't had to consider for generations. We'll be partners now, not guardians. That means when threats arise, we'll be depending on you and the other coalition species to help us address them. Zaratiel stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Are you saying you've been carrying the burden of galactic security alone all this time? Not alone, Marcus replied. But we've definitely been carrying more of it than anyone else realized. She studied his expression, noting the subtle signs of fatigue that suggested the weight of that responsibility had been heavier than his mild-mannered facade had ever revealed. Then, perhaps, she said with the authority of someone who had been born to share in difficult burdens, it's time for the rest of us to help carry the load. As they continued toward their respective quarters, Zaratiel reflected on how much had changed in the span of a single day. She had arrived at Station Harmony expecting routine diplomatic negotiations and cultural exchanges. Instead, she was returning home with knowledge that would reshape her empire's understanding of their place in the galaxy and their relationship with the beings who had been secretly protecting them for centuries. The rookie security officer had turned out to be an apex predator with the power to reshape civilizations. The apex predators that should have been mindless killing machines had responded to communication techniques that violated every principle of xenobiology. And the galaxy itself had revealed depths and complexities that would take generations to fully understand. But, perhaps most importantly, for the first time in galactic history, the most dangerous species in known space had voluntarily chosen to reveal their true nature and work openly with the beings they could have simply dominated. It was, Zaratiel thought as she prepared to draft the most important report in her empire's diplomatic history, going to be a very interesting new age. And she found herself looking forward to discovering what other surprises humanity had been hiding while they waited for the rest of the galaxy to become ready for the truth.